Good evening, night crawlers. Tonight's story arrived in our inbox at exactly 3:07 a.m. last Thursday. The subject line was only 3 words. Please read. Please. The sender, let's call her May, claimed she had never told a soul what happened to her during her senior year at St. Dimphna's School for Girls. She wrote that she finally had to speak because the thing she saw in that classroom has started showing up again, outside her bedroom window. She begged us to share her account verbatim, swearing on every saint she no longer believes in that every word is true. So, as always, lock your doors, turn off the lights, and put on your headphones. This is Mr. Nightmare's Radio, and tonight we will tell you what really happened to May when the last bell rings at St. Dimphna's. I was the kind of kid who alphabetized her trauma. Abandonment, bullying, college rejection, dead mom. Each memory had its own color-coded folder in my head, neatly paper-clipped so I could thumb through them whenever I needed to remind myself why I couldn't cry in public. By the time I was 17, I believed I'd already met the worst things the world could show me. I was wrong. The worst thing wasn't a drunken foster father or the guidance counselor who said my SAT score was brave for an orphan. The worst thing was room 313 and the hour between 12 o'clock and 12:59 a.m. inside it. St. Dimphna's sat on the lip of the Berkshire Hills like a rotting incisor. The brochure called it a rigorous college preparatory environment steeped in tradition. The locals called it the nunnery where girls go to disappear. I arrived in August 2018, 2 weeks after my mother's heart attack, with 1 duffel bag and a scholarship earmarked for underprivileged youth. Sister Imelda, the headmistress, greeted me at the iron gate. Her eyes were the gray of freezer-burned meat. "Remember, Miss Zhang," she said, fingers tightening on my shoulder like talons. "At St. Dimphna's we honor the 3 S's: silence, study, and sacrifice." I laughed, an involuntary hiccup of grief. She didn't flinch. Sacrifice, she repeated, would be my favorite. The first oddity was the bell schedule. Classes began at 7:03 a.m. and ended at 2:46 p.m., precise to the minute. No one questioned it. The nuns said the founder, Mother Dimphna, had received the numbers in a vision. The second oddity was curfew. Boarders had to be in their dormitories by 8 p.m., lights out at 9 o'clock. After that, the corridors were patrolled by Sister Agatha, a woman shaped like a grandfather clock, who walked with a cane that struck the floorboards in 4/4 time. If you left your room after hours, the cane stopped. Then you heard the breathing, wet, clotted, as though someone were inhaling through a soaked towel. No one ever admitted to being caught. They just weren't there in the morning. Officially, they'd withdrawn due to homesickness. Unofficially, we called it getting canned. I learned all this on my 3rd night, when the girl across the hall, Caitlin, pressed a note under my door. "Don't go to the bathroom after 9. She can smell the soap on your hands." I taped the note inside my journal. That was the last communication I ever received from Caitlin. She was canned the following week. Her side of the hallway smelled faintly of aluminium for days. Room 313 was on the top floor of Barron Hall, the oldest building on campus. The wooden steps bowed like piano wire, and the walls wept a yellow resin that smelled of crushed aspirin. I didn't have class there until October. Advanced chemistry, last period of the day. The teacher, Mr. Verdier, was the only male faculty member. Young, thin, hair the color of ditch water. He wore the same corduroy coat every lesson, pockets bulging with chalk and what looked like loose tobacco. On the first day, he wrote his name on the blackboard in perfect cursive, then turned and stared at us as if we'd already disappointed him. "Time," he said, "is not a river in this room. It is a bruise." I wrote the sentence in the margin of my notebook. Beneath it, inexplicably, my pen produced a second line I hadn't intended. "Bruises darken after midnight." I blamed the grief counseling meds and snapped the pen in half. 3 weeks into term, I noticed the clock above the blackboard ran backward. Not metaphorically, literally. The second hand swept counterclockwise, dragging the minute and hour hands with it. When I asked Mr. Verdier about it, He smiled the way snakes look when they unhinge their jaws. Observant, Miss Zhang. Time heals all wounds, but first it must rewind the skin. After that, I stopped looking at the clock. Instead, I watched the windows. Every afternoon at 2:46 p.m., when the final bell rang, the glass reflected not the sky but the classroom itself, except the desks were occupied by girls I didn't recognize. Their faces were blurred, as if someone had smudged wet paint. One of them wore the same plaid skirt I had on. She raised her hand and pointed at me. Then the reflection ended, and the windows showed only the gray New England dusk. I began to dream of the room. In the dream, it was always midnight. I sat at the teacher's desk, a single Coleman lantern hissing in front of me. The seats were filled with mannequins wearing St. Dymphna's uniforms. Their hands were real, soft, human, warm, as they reached out and pinched my arms, testing for ripeness. On the blackboard, someone had written, "Silence, study, sacrifice." The chalk letters wept blood that evaporated before it hit the floor. I tasted iron and woke gasping. My roommate, Priya, slept through every episode. She said she never heard me scream, but in the morning my throat was shredded. October 31st. Halloween fell on a Wednesday. The faculty canceled afternoon classes for All Saints reflection, which meant compulsory mass and then confinement to our rooms, while the nuns roamed the halls with aspergilla, flicking holy water on the doorframes. I faked a stomach cramp and slipped out after head count. I needed answers. The school library, technically closed, was unlocked. The librarian, Sister Concepta, dozed at her desk, rosary beads clicking softly as she breathed. I crept into the archives. Dust rose like incense. I pulled every yearbook I could find for St. Dymphna's. The earliest was 1919. Halfway through the 1974 edition, I found Mr. Verdier. Same lank hair, same corduroy coat. The caption read, "Brother Luke Verdier, Chair of Natural Sciences, beloved by students for his innovative experiments in circadian biology." I stared until the ink seemed to crawl. 1974. 44 years ago, and he hadn't aged a day. I flipped forward. He appeared again in 1981, 1993, 2006. Always identical. The final photo was dated 2013. Someone had scratched out his eyes with a compass point. Underneath, in red ballpoint, a girl had written, "He keeps the clocks." I must have made a noise, an inhale, a whimper, because Sister Concepta jerked awake. "Who's there?" I shoved the yearbook into my backpack and sprinted. Behind me, her cane clacked against the stone floor, faster and faster, until it sounded like a typewriter carriage return. I ducked into the laundry chute room and waited until the building fell silent. When I finally returned to my dorm, Priya was gone. Her bed was perfectly made, hospital corners. On her pillow sat a note in my own handwriting. "Silence, study, sacrifice. See you at midnight." I hadn't written it, but the ink was still wet. I decided to break into room 313. If the answers lived anywhere, it was there. I waited until 11:30 p.m., after Agatha's second round but before the 1 a.m. sweep. I wore dark jeans, black hoodie, rubber-soled sneakers. I tucked my phone into airplane mode. The school blocked Wi-Fi after hours, and I didn't want the screen lighting up like a beacon. The hallway smelled of ammonia and old wax. My pulse thumped so hard I tasted it. The door to 313 was supposed to be locked. It wasn't. The knob turned with a sigh, as though the room had been holding its breath for years. Inside, moonlight sliced between the blinds and painted the desks in bone-white bars. The air was colder than outside, cold enough to see my breath. I stepped in and closed the door. The clock above the blackboard ticked forward for the first time since I'd arrived. 12 a.m. exactly. I felt it before I heard it. A pressure change, like an elevator dropping too fast. The blackboard erased itself. Words appeared, letter by letter, as if an invisible hand scraped chalk across slate. "Welcome to final exam." Below that, question 1. What is sacrifice? I backed up. My calves hit a desk. The desk wasn't empty. A girl sat there, uniform askew, hair over her face. She raised her head. Caitlin. Her skin was translucent. I could see the veins pulsing black under the surface. May, she whispered, voice layered like a choir out of tune. You're early. I ran for the door. It had vanished. Smooth plaster where the frame had been. I was inside a box now. No windows, no exit. Only the desks and the clock racing forward. 12:07. 12:08. The other seats filled. One by one, girls materialized. Priya. Caitlin. Names I didn't know, faces I did, because I'd seen them scratched out of yearbooks. All of them looked at me. All of them spoke in perfect unison. Answer the question. On the teacher's desk sat a single sheet of paper and a fountain pen filled with something too dark to be ink. I picked it up. My hand moved without permission. I wrote, "Sacrifice is giving up something you love." The moment the period dotted the paper, every fluorescent light snapped on, blinding, surgical. Mr. Verdier stood at the board. He hadn't been there a second earlier. "Incorrect," he said gently. "But we can fix that." Mr. Verdier stepped closer. The overhead lights hummed like hornets. "Sacrifice," he said, "is not the act of giving. It is the moment the blade recognizes the throat." He placed a hand on my shoulder. His fingers were cold enough to burn. The fountain pen twitched in my grip, the nib still dripping. I saw now that the ink was the color of oxygenated blood. Too bright, too alive. "Question 2, he continued, voice velvet soft. "Whose throat?" The girls in the desks began to smile. Their teeth were the yellow of old piano keys. I tried to drop the pen. My fingers wouldn't unclench. On the blackboard, chalk screeched by itself. "Answer or forfeit." I looked at Priya. A tear, thick as mercury, rolled down her cheek and splattered on the desk, where it sizzled like grease. I wrote the only name I could think of. Mine. The word May crawled across the page in my handwriting, then lifted off the paper like a 3D printer filament, forming a cursive wire that wrapped around my wrist. The wire tightened. Skin split. No blood, just a cold vacuum where the pulse should have been. "Better," Verdier whispered, but still incomplete. He snapped his fingers. The floor peeled open, not metaphorically. The tiles folded back like petals, revealing a spiral staircase of rusted iron that descended into absolute dark. "Final practical exam," he said. 17 steps. Each step costs a memory. When you reach the bottom, you'll understand sacrifice. The desks emptied. The girls stood and formed a corridor, gesturing for me to walk. I felt my legs move without consent. 17 steps. I counted them aloud, because counting was the only weapon I had left. Step 1. The scent of my mother's dumplings vanished from memory. Step 2. I forgot the sound of her laugh. Step 3. The color of my childhood bedsheets. Step 4. The taste of fresh lychee. Step 5. My best friend's face before St. Dymphna's. Step 6. The lyrics to the lullaby she used to hum. Step 7. The warmth of sunlight on my shoulders. With each step, something was surgically excised. Not blurred, erased. I tried to hold on, but the void sucked the edges clean. By step 10, I couldn't remember my mother's name, only that she had one. By step 12, I wasn't sure I'd ever had a mother. Step 13, my own birthday. Step 14, the feeling of being loved. Step 15, my reflection. Step 16, my name. Step 17, I ceased to know that I had ever existed. Then the darkness spat me out. I woke on the classroom floor. The clock read 12:59 a.m., but the hands were spinning so fast they blurred into a silver coin. Verdier knelt beside me. "Congratulations," he said. "You passed." He held up a Polaroid. It showed me sitting at the teacher's desk, eyes vacant, mouth sewn shut with red thread. Behind me, the blackboard bore a single sentence. "Sacrifice is complete when the victim thanks the knife." I tried to scream. The stitches held. Verdier tore the photo in half. The pain was instant, like someone had ripped my spine out through my navel. I convulsed, but my body remained eerily still, as if the agony were happening to a film negative of myself. "Now you belong to the room," he said. "When the next girl arrives, You'll help correct her exam." He stood, adjusted his corduroy coat, and walked into the blackboard, literally through it, like a man stepping through curtains. The lights cut out. I was alone, except I wasn't. I could feel them. The other girls, the ones who'd passed before me, they lived under the floorboards behind the drywall inside the clock. Their heartbeats ticked in place of the second hand. And now my heartbeat was part of the chorus. Days passed, maybe weeks. Time had no reference inside 313. I discovered I could phase through the walls when no one was looking. Not walk exactly, more like being poured. I watched the living students attend class. They couldn't see me unless the clock struck 12 a.m. while they were inside. Rule: only one girl could be enrolled per semester. The rest were background noise. I learned the architecture of hunger. The room fed on memory, but it craved recognition most of all. Every time a girl noticed something wrong, the backward clock, the extra desk, the faint smell of iron, the room grew thicker, richer. My job as the newest teaching assistant was to amplify that recognition. I whispered questions into ears at night. Did you see the clock? Why is the door locked after hours? Who sits at the empty desk? Plant the seed. Water the doubt. Harvest at midnight. I hated myself for it, except self-hatred requires a self, and I donated mine on the 17th step. Still, something must have remained because one night I broke the rule. Her name was Lila. 15. Freckles like cinnamon. A nervous habit of braiding and unbraiding her hair. She started seeing me. Really seeing. During lab, she stared directly at my reflection in the window and mouthed, "Help." I felt the word hit me like a defibrillator. That night she emailed the school counselor. "I think there's a girl trapped in room 313. The counselor never replied. But the room knew. At 11:59 p.m. the next night, Lila was yanked from her bed by invisible tricycles of force. Sheets twisted into restraints, mouth gagged with her own braid. I watched her dragged down the corridor, heels thudding like drumsticks. The door to 313 yawned open. I stood inside, unable to move, as Verdier materialized. "Graduate to proctor," he said to me. "Administer the exam." He handed me the fountain pen. Lila's eyes, wide, liquid, locked on mine. I remembered step 17, the emptiness. I would not gift that abyss to her. So I did the only thing left in my arsenal. I stabbed Verdier in the eye with the pen. The nib sank with a wet crunch. Black ink. Not his spurted out, thick as tar. He screamed, but the sound was every bell in St. Dymphna's ringing at once. The windows shattered outward. Shards hung midair like a frozen rainstorm. The clock exploded, gears raining in slow motion. I grabbed Lila's hand. "Run," I croaked, voice rusty from disuse. We bolted. Down the corridor, stairs sagging like old accordion bellows. Behind us, the building folded in on itself. Classrooms collapsing into envelopes, lockers blooming like iron flowers. We reached the front entrance. The double doors were chained, but the links were made of chalk. I shoulder-checked them. They powdered. Outside, the night smelled of wet leaves and diesel, real-world air so sharp it cut my phantom lungs. We kept running. We didn't stop until the asphalt turned to highway and the highway to dawn. Lila moved in with her aunt in Vermont. I followed, no body, just a presence. She talked to me sometimes. Left snacks on the windowsill, Oreos, peppermint tea. I couldn't taste them, but the gesture kept me stitched together. Months passed. I began to hope the exam had ended with me. Then the nightmares started. Not mine, Lila's. She'd wake screaming about desks multiplying in her bedroom, about the backward clock, about Verdier's eye healing over and over, the pen still jutting like a mast. Each night, the dream grew more solid. One morning, she found ink on her pillowcase. My ink, the color of arterial blood. She stopped sleeping. Dark circles bloomed under her eyes like bruise petals. I knew what the room wanted. It wasn't finished. I was the flaw in its grating curve, and flaws must be erased. I left before it could use me as bait. Drifted south, riding the backs of semi-trucks, the hum of tires my only lullaby. I haunted libraries, scrolling microfiche, searching for St. Dymphna's history. Found it. Founded 1916. Burned to the ground 1919. Rebuilt 1920. Burned again 1934. Again 1954. Again 1974, the year Verdier first appeared in the yearbook. Every fire happened on October 31st. Every rebuild added a new brick inscribed with the same Latin motto. Tempus edax rerum. Time, the devourer of all things. I realized the school wasn't cursed. It was a stomach. Room 313, its pyloric valve. Verdier? Maybe once human, now merely the ulcer that kept the acid flowing. And I was a splinter the stomach couldn't dissolve. So it cramped. And it followed. The emails started last month. I'd commandeer library computers, cafe Wi-Fi, phone booths if I could find them. Every inbox identical. Subject: please read. Please. Body: a single .wav file. When I played it back, I heard my own voice I no longer possessed, reciting the 17 steps. Each playback added a new step. Step 18, the moment you realize you never left. Step 19, the reflection that refuses to mimic you. Step 20, the knock on the window at 3:07 a.m. Step 21, the realization the knocking is from inside your chest. I tried deleting the files. They reappeared on the desktop, multiplied like mold spores. I stopped sleeping. Shadows pooled in my peripheral vision, thick as spilled paint. Last week, the final email arrived. No attachment. Just text. Midnight. Classroom. Bring the pen. I knew what I had to do, so I typed the only email address that felt safe. And I told you everything. Because if enough people hear the story, maybe the room will split its attention. Maybe you'll carry a fraction of the weight. Maybe collective memory can anchor me long enough to... Sorry. It's 12 a.m. while I write this. The library lights just flickered. The emergency exit at the far end is opening by itself. Through it, I see desks, rows of them, and a clock ticking backward. I have to go. If you're listening, remember, don't answer the question. Don't take the pen. And for God's sake, don't look at the windows when the bell rings at St. Dymphna's. The exam never ends. It just changes proctors. May hit send at 12:03 a.m. The email contained one last audio file. 17 seconds of silence, followed by the scrape of chalk and a girl's voice whispering, "Your turn." We tracked the IP. It originated from inside Barron Hall, an abandoned building that officially hasn't had electricity since the fire of '74. We called the local sheriff. They searched room 313, found nothing except a fresh equation scrawled on the blackboard. Infinity 1 equals infinity, and a single fountain pen lying on the teacher's desk. Still there, waiting, because every story you share is an invitation, and every listener is a new enrollee. If you attend a school with a bell schedule that splits the minute, if your reflection ever takes an extra second to catch up, if you find a pen that writes in a color you can't name, email us, but never, ever after midnight, because Mr. Nightmare's radio isn't just a channel. We're the note under the door, the breathing in the hallway, the last bell you hear before the silence eats your name. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this episode with someone who thinks ghosts aren't real. Then look at the clock. If it's 12 a.m. and you hear footsteps outside your room, don't answer. Just press play again. And remember, time is not a river. It's a bruise, and it's darkest after midnight.